So welcome everybody to our Small Presses Present Their Fall and Winter Lists. Please stay muted and use the chat function to ask any questions you have. I'll monitor the chat and pass on your questions, or presenters will respond directly. Now to introduce our presenters. Ellen Whitfield is a senior publicist with JKS Communications, a literary publicity firm that has represented many Southern authors and SIBA award-winning books over the past 2 decades. Before joining the JKS team, Ellen worked as a journalist. She's also a popular bookstagrammer and an avid bibliophile living in Louisiana with her newspaper executive husband, bright and spirited daughter, and an ever-growing collection of books. Steve McConaughey is co-founder of Southern Fried Karma, an Atlanta-based multimedia company, and the managing partner overseeing the operation of their independent publishing imprints, their online literary magazine, the retail bookstore, and their film development company. Steve and Southern Fried Karma are intent on bringing civil, social discourse to the communities they serve by sharing thoughtful, well-written stories that allow for critical reflection and free thinking. Jacqueline Jarek is the Associate Manager of Publicity at Agate Publishing, where she oversees the publicity campaigns and event planning for all titles across Agate's 4 main imprints: Bolden Books, Midway Books, Surrey Books, and B2 Books. She has been employed by Agate since 2015 in a variety of publicity roles. She is a graduate of the University of Michigan, and she lives in Chicago, Illinois. Nancy McCloskey is the Sales and Marketing Director of Tin House Books and based, like the press, in Portland, Oregon, where she lives with her 2 little boys. Tin House Books is an independent press that publishes roughly a dozen titles a year, and its authors have garnered attention from the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Oprah magazine. John Seeley is a Richmond, Virginia-based author and newly minted publisher. His first novel, The Whiskey Baron, was published by Hub City Press in 2014 to high acclaim. This year, he launched a small publishing house, Haywire Books, which is dedicated to the making sense of a chaotic world. His first title will be his own, The Edge of America, which is a current Okra pick and pub September 10th, with 3 more authors in the catalog to follow. Kelly Justice of Fountain Bookstore just called in right before this event to put in a big shout out for him. His new book, Edge of America, is featured on the cover of her newsletter, and she wants you all to purchase his book for your store. She actually didn't say that, but I know she meant that. She said that John does everything right, and he's a big supporter of independent bookstores. So let's begin with Ellen.
So I just wanted to say a little bit about JKS. We're a full-service literary publicity and book marketing firm who represent some of the best publishers, authors, and books from around the world, not just in the U.S. And we consist of professionals who work in media relations, book tours, social networking, online visibility, indie book publishing, and all that stuff. So we tailor campaigns to each author, but we have a good number of authors going to SIBA this year, and we're so excited. The first one I wanted to talk about is actually based in Nashville. His name is Andrew Marinus. He is a New York Times bestselling author. He wrote Strong Inside, which was the story of the first black basketball player in the SEC. And he's releasing Games of Deception this November, which talks about the history of the first time that basketball was included in the Olympics, which was the 1936 Summer Games in Hitler's Germany. So it has a lot of crossover appeal for adults, but it could also be read as a family as well. Next up, we have Cliff Garstang. He's a former international lawyer, and he's a prize-winning author. And his new book talks a lot about Southern roots. It's called The Shaman of Turtle Valley. It explores the healing of wounds in families, nations, and landscape. And it talks about a soldier who's Seishin in Seoul, who gets a Korean girl pregnant and tries to make things right by bringing her back to America. So it talks a lot about, the tradition she has as a Korean woman, but also his family as an Appalachian family. So it talks a lot about that, and he'll be at Movable Feast on Sunday afternoon. Sid Bauman Jr. is a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, and he's a fourth generation Texan. He is releasing his debut novel, Seventh Flag, in October. So he was a veteran reporter who covered 4 major wars and traveled with two presidents. So he has a lot of experience to draw on. And his book follows a white family and a Muslim family in a small West Texas town. And it kind of analyzes how subsequent generations of these families deal with the different turmoils and, you know, the strife that comes with their, what's going on in their times. Then we have Annette Valentine. She was born in Kentucky and now lives in Nashville. And she has written Eastbound from Flagstaff, which releases in September. It kind of blends historical fiction with more classical foundations, and it talks about a character who she's running from a lie, and he's running from a lie, I'm sorry, and talks about the significance of family loyalty and the richness of heritage, and it's the first in a planned series dedicated to her father. Then we have Georgia author Mike Nemeth.
Are you sharing your screen? Because
I'm sorry, I'm not. You should have I should have remembered to do that since you reminded me to do that. Let me do that really quickly, and I'll go over those. This is Andrew's cover right here. And then we talked about Sid. And we talked about Annette Valentine. And then Cliff's cover is right here. And then next up we have Mike Nemeth, who this is his second cover. It's The Undiscovered Country. He's from Georgia. And his books are very Southern. They're about the complexity of families and, you know, the secrets that they can have hidden. He has a third book planned in this series as well. And then we have Diane Dewey, who is releasing Fixing the Fates. And she lives in St. Petersburg, and her story is a memoir, actually. So 2 months after the passing of her adopted father, she was contacted by someone in Switzerland who turned out to be her biological father. So they meet in Florida and kind of talk about all that background behind her birth and her biological family. And then we have a very Texas author named Mary Jane Black. She has written a true story about how she escaped an abusive marriage and when she fell in love with her now husband, Dwayne, who taught her to ride a Harley. And then when he was diagnosed with cancer, she kind of embraced a role as a caretaker. And then we have Derek Havagano, who has a kind of a gory horror novel that has some Southern roots to it. And it's about a cop who investigate these crime scenes while that are set up to look like art exhibits. So it's definitely, you know, more of the horror route, but they're very interesting and kind of have to do with the serial killers. And then we also have Rhea Frey, who will be there, and she has 2 novels. One is Not Her Daughter, which was just released in paperback and is being turned into a movie. And then Because You're Mine came out this month in August. And they're both domestic thrillers dealing with family life and the secrets we left behind. And she's also based in Nashville. And then we're also working with Southern Fried Karma and their author, George Weinstein. But I think Steve can probably tell you guys a little bit more about that in detail.
Was that your final title?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was muted also.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no. So that's it from me, and I think Steve's up next, and I thought he could tell you all a little bit more about George's book.
Sure. Okay, Steve.
Great segue. Thank you so much. So I'm Steve McConaughey with Southern Fried Karma, one of the co-founders and publisher. And I describe Southern Fried Karma as a mission with a business. And our mission is to tell a million tales of y'all means all. We do that in a lot of different ways. I'm talking to you from a private spot in our bookstore in downtown Newnan, Georgia, called Southern Fried Books. So we're an independent bookstore. We also have an online literary magazine called The New Southern Fugitives. Comes out every other week, and we tell that has short stories in it, essays, flash fiction, book reviews, and visual arts. And then we're also use SFK Press to help spread the mission. And SFK Press, thanks to a PhD friend of mine, has given me a succinct way to describe Southern Fried Karma and SFK Press. Is we specialize in transgressive Southern fiction, which kind of means weird stories about the South that really expose what the South is really all about. So I'm going to talk about 4 of our titles for 2019. And then I got one really special announcement I'm going to save to the end. I'm going to start my timer so I don't forget that I can talk too much. So the first book I want to talk about, I'm going to hold these up because I ain't near as PowerPoint friendly as y'all are, is this book here. And you may be seeing the backwards, but I'm not sure whether you're seeing this frontwards or backwards. Anyway, it is swapping. It's swapping purples for yellow. This was released in August. This week, as a matter of fact. And the author is Matthew Duffus. Matthew is the creative writing director at Gardner Webb in Boiling Springs, North Carolina, not Shelby. So if you think it's a college life story, you think of Richard Russo or Don DeLillo, but without the snark. It really focuses less on that college life, and that's part of the story. And it has more to do with the story of family and what a family has to do in order to stay together. One of the things that I think, well, I read the first chapter of this book 4 years ago in a creative writing workshop at Tinker Mountain in Hollins University, and have been tracking that book for that long, for 4 years. And that's one of the neat things about being a fiercely independent publisher, is that we can find these kind of pet projects and stay with it. So that's swapping purples for yellows. The next book I want to talk about is this one, and it's Farrell, North Carolina, 1965. And the author is June Sylvester Sarcano, if I'm pronouncing it with the Italian pronunciation. She runs the MFA program at Sierra Nevada College in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And she's originally from North Carolina. This is a collection of interconnected short stories. It has an Ann Patchett, Barbara Kingsolver feel to it, with a little bit of that Lauren Groff style of writing short stories. One of my favorite parts about June's book was a blurb that we got, and it says it's a love letter to all the girls who run in the world with their hair on fire. And I thought it was a beautiful way to describe a book that I would never have come up with on my own. So that's Farrell, North Carolina, 1965. The next book I'm going to talk about is this one, and this is Appalachian Book of the Dead by Dale Neal. Dale is a Asheville, Hendersonville native, was a journalist in the area for a long time, and Dale and I were coming up with a way to describe this book, comparable titles, and Dale is a practicing Buddhist. So we said it's Ron Rash meets the Dalai Lama. It has some thriller elements to it. It has issues with Hungry Ghost, which really provides some depth to the story. And Dale's book came to us a couple of years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. He was one of the finalists for our first novel contest. He didn't win, but it was a book that I really personally connected with, and we have worked with Dale over the couple 3 years to develop it into what it is now. And the cool thing about this book, there's a couple of them, it's going to be in the trio program this year, the last trio program. So Dale will be at the SIBA Discovery Show, and you'll have a chance to hear the songs and the visual art that comes with Appalachian Book of the Dead, which I'm really excited to hear. Then the fourth book I want to talk about is the book that we're working with the good folks at JSK on, and that is Watch What You Say by George Weinstein. George is an Atlanta-based writer. He lives up in Roswell. He is currently president of the Atlanta Writers Club. He is a longtime organizer of the Atlanta Writers Conference. He has a lot of connections with readers and writers throughout the Southeast. Excuse me. He is. I just heard him speak the other night at a local coffee shop, and he does a wonderful job of telling the story behind the story. With him, where he learned to writing love letters to his wife. He talks about 23 and a half love letters. He does great with book clubs. He knows how to engage an audience, and his story, early feedback on it has been marvelous. And George will be one of our two participants, or three participants actually, in the Parapalooza, which we will be. That's the big announcement. We are the sponsor of the Parapalooza on Saturday night at the SIBA Discovery Show. It will be fun. There will be margaritas, I understand, and I get to MC that, so I'm working on my best. I don't know, was it Ellen DeGeneres or Johnny Carson? I'm not sure how I'm going to come out, but it's going to be an entertaining evening. I'm already getting coached up by Wanda Jewell. Y'all can imagine what that's like. But the other thing we're going to be announcing there is our Discover 50/50 Fund program that will be announcing at the SIBA Discovery Show. In fact, you'll probably get something in the mail, postcard about that here soon. It's an exciting wholesale program that we're going to be running for 6 months. I work with a couple of leaders in the independent bookstores here in Georgia to come up with a program that I think will allow booksellers in the South to get to know us and our authors at the lowest possible risk they can and the highest possible margin. Low risk, high return type of deal that we'll be talking about, and it's called Discover 50/50 Fund. And Lynn Marie, I think I have talked myself out. I think I covered it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was great. And next up, we have Jacqueline.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. As Linda Marie said, I'm the Associate Manager of Publicity here at Agate Publishing. We're an independent publisher based in Evanston, Illinois, which is a northern suburb of Chicago, and we're distributed by Publishers Group West. I'm going to talk about 5 of the books on our fall list that we're really excited about. The first one is State, A Team, a Triumph, a Transformation by Melissa Isaacson. This just came out yesterday and is getting some really great pickup, which is really nice to see. This is the memoir of Melissa Isaacson, who's an award-winning sports writer. She covered the Michael Jordan era-led Chicago Bulls for the Chicago Tribune during the 90s, and she grew up playing basketball in suburban Chicago right after Title IX passed, and she tells a story about how she and her teammates won the Illinois State Girls Basketball Championship in 1979. And when she reconnected with all of her teammates, she learned everyone had these personal things going on in their lives that each other did not know at all about when they were winning a state championship, and it's a really moving memoir. We're really excited about it. You may see the author on a national morning television program in the coming weeks. We're very excited. The next book we have also came out yesterday. It's called Ensemble, An Oral History of Chicago Theater by Mark Larson. Mark conducted over 300 interviews with everyone from actors to playwrights, directors, crew members, people who worked in Chicago theater over the last 60 years. And while you may think this is really a Chicago story, Chicago theater actually produced a lot of stars and household names you're probably really familiar with, like David Schwimmer and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Ed Asner, David Mamet. All of them got their starts here in Chicago. So we're really excited about this one. The beauty of this book is that it's huge and you can skip around and read about theater companies you like the Second City or Steppenwolf, or you can read it all the way through and get a really good picture of how these theater companies helped each other out, worked together, and produced some of those superstars that everyone knows. So that's Ensemble. It came out yesterday. The next book we have is actually one of our cookbooks. It's called Lush, a season-by-season celebration of craft beer and produce. This book is by Jacqueline Dodd, who you may be familiar with from her very popular Cooking with Beer website, The Beeriness. And the recipes in this book are really cool because it's not just recipes for beer chili or brats in beer. All of the recipes are vegetarian and incorporate seasonal produce and use the flavors of seasonal produce to bring out nuanced flavors in craft beer. So there are recipes like grilled apricot saison shortcakes, chocolate stout oatmeal bars, a lot of really elevated recipes, and the photography is all really beautiful. We're excited about this one, and we think readers will be also. This comes out October 15th. This memoir is called The Color of Love. It's coming out November 12th, and it's by independent film and television producer Mara Gad. Mara will be touring this fall with the Jewish Book Council, and she'll be actually in Florida in December and in Tennessee in January. Her memoir is about her experience growing up in Chicago in the 70s as a mixed-race Jewish woman who was adopted by a Jewish family and struggled because she was never Black enough for Black spaces, and in Jewish spaces she was mistaken for the help or asked to leave. And her memoir takes an interesting turn when she has to help her great aunt, who was a racist and mean to her in her childhood, when her great aunt develops Alzheimer's, and Mara is the only person who can help her. So that's The Color of Love. We're kind of comparing it to other honest and hard-hitting memoirs like All You Can Ever Know and Educated. It's sort of in that same vein, and this comes out in November. And then the last book, we don't have arcs or anything yet, but also in November, I have the cover proofs we just got. It's called He Had It Coming, and this is one of the projects we have developed with the Chicago Tribune, and this focuses on the 4 real women who inspired Maureen Watkins to write the play Chicago, which became a musical that most people are familiar with. Maureen Watkins was the Chicago Tribune reporter who covered these women's stories during their trials, covered their crimes. There's a lot of original photography from the 20s and newspaper clippings, and the current team at the Tribune has sort of looked at this with a new light, looked at their stories in a new light. We think this is going to be a really great gift item. The photos are really cool. We're excited about that, and that comes out in November as well. And I just want to also make a quick plug for another one of our cookbooks that came out in May, called Pesto, the Modern Mother Sauce. This is actually This was written by Leslie Lennox, who started her pesto company in Atlanta. And a lot of folks in Atlanta are really familiar with her, but this is another seasonal cookbook that teaches readers how they can make pesto with seasonal ingredients and things they have in their pantries, because once you know the ratios of things to use, you can make pesto out of anything. And I think that's all I have. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And now we're on to Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy McCluskey from Tin House in Portland, Oregon. We publish about 18 books a year. We do a lot of literary fiction, memoir, some art books, some nonfiction. We're distributed by W.W. Norton. The first book I'm going to tell you about is a poetry collection. It's coming out September 3rd, Hanif Abdurraqib. Anybody who's at Winter Institute may have met this guy. He was a keynote speaker there. He was phenomenal. My first thought when I was listening to him talk was, if he started a cult, I think I would join. He's so extraordinary and charismatic. His biography on A Tribe Called Quest was a New York Times bestseller. I think this book is just going to be huge. It's so funny and thoughtful and irreverent, and it's about love and forgiveness, and did Michael Jordan push off in the 1998 finals, and a mother's death, and what happens when you break up with somebody and that breakup renders you a completely different person than who you were beforehand. It's going to have this kind of intense appeal. I mean, everybody just loves this guy. He has 60,000 Twitter followers. Questlove is a fan. He's been published in the New Yorker and the New York Times and Pitchfork and the Paris Review and Fader, and we have really high expectations for it. The second book is The Last Taxi Driver by Lee Durkee. This is gritty Southern lit at its absolute best. I love this book. I read it in a sitting. It's an autobiographical novel. So the story with this Durkee guy is he wrote a book 18 years ago called The Path of the Midway. And in 2001, it came out. Norton published it. And for the last 18 years, this guy has been driving a cab in Oxford, Mississippi. And he's just like kind of on the brink. Like, he can't believe this is the way that his life has ended up. And now Trump has just gotten elected, and he's driving around in his town car. Drunk frat boys are screaming, build the wall, build the wall. And he's like, screw this, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to write a novel about this experience. And this is what it is. It is so good. It's so propulsive. I have two tiny kids, and you know what it's like when you have little kids and sleep is a premium. And I stayed up till 2 in the morning. I just couldn't put it down. It's about this guy. His name is Lou, and he's shuttling these hospital wards around, and these kind of retail workers and these drug addicts, and all the while his life is kind of unraveling, and you know that. And then what makes it so propulsive is this. His boss's son comes back into town, and he has a warrant out for his arrest, and you just know things are going to go bad, and Lou can't help getting mixed up in this business, and everything does unravel. So it's coming out in March. We're going to do a big tour in the South for him. He has a huge amount of fans in the South, but George Saunders wrote the most glorious blurb about this book. He says it's a wild, funny, poetic fever dream that will change the way you think about America. And that's kind of the way I think about this book too. The next book is called The Magical Language of Others. It's our lead title for the winter season. It's coming out in January by E.J. Koh. She's a Seattle-based writer. She was just in New York though for the summer. She is writing the television adaptation of Pachinko, and Min Jin Lee actually said to her that your memoir is the true story of Pachinko. It's the story, this story is about mothers and daughters. It's kind of a love story about mothers and daughters. When EJ is 14 years old, her mom and dad decide to leave her in Davis, California to take a job opportunity in Seoul, Korea. And they leave a 14-year-old girl and her 20-year-old brother alone. And it's supposed to be a 2-year job. And they don't come back for 9 years. And it's about this kind of unraveling that happens. And the way that the mom really communicates with EJ is through these letters. But she writes them in Korean, and EJ is American, so she can't really even understand what these letters are. So they're left mostly untranslated. And there's 49 of them. And in Korean culture, 49 is a very special number, and it means renewal, and it means going back. So when EJ finds these letters, she decides that she's going to start investigating this relationship and unpacking. And she not only just investigates her relationship with her own mom, but with her grandparents' story too, about how these decisions got made. EJ's a poet. She's very well known for that. She again has a huge platform on social media. I think it's something like 30,000 Twitter followers. And she tells the story with such grace and such openness and such rawness. It's really beautiful. The next book I'm going to tell you about is the autobiography of Carson McCullers by Jen Chaplin. So this is a memoir and an investigation into Carson McCullers' life. It came about because Jen was doing this internship at the Ransom Center in Austin, and she uncovered these letters between Carson McCullers and her therapist that reveal this whole other story of Carson McCullers that isn't really talked about, which is her life as a queer woman. And Jen at the time is coming to terms with her own sexuality. So she starts really diving in deep into Carson's life. And she ends up getting to live in Carson's house in Columbus, Georgia. And there's one point in the book where she has like Carson's famous kimono on, and she's kind of lounging in her bathtub, and she's reading all these stories. I mean, she really dives deep into it. But what she's learning is about herself and who she is. And I'm going to read you just one really short quote from it because I just think it's sort of perfect about what she says. She says, "The stories of women are paved over by others' narratives. So often we rarely get to hear about how things went from their perspective, from the inside. Constant revision is required of queer women trying to navigate and self-actualize straight spaces in the context of outright censorship of women's relationships. It only makes sense that Carson McCullers' story would be repackaged as a straight narrative." So she's this is going to appeal to people who love Carson and to people who are interested in memoir and queer stories. But I think Melissa Febos does such an amazing job in her blurb for it because she says, you don't need to be a queer woman, a lover of Carson McCullers' fiction, or interested in the mysterious junctures between our lives and those of our favorite artists to love this book. But for those who love all of those things, this book is a revelation. So I'm excited about this. It comes out in February. This book, Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl, by Jeannie Vanasco. Jeannie wrote, her first book was a memoir called The Glass Eye. It was an Indies Introduced pick, and then it was an Indie Next pick. And this is her sophomore effort. And this story is so mind-blowing. So when Jeannie was 18 years old, she went home to Ohio for her first weekend after going away to college. And she's with all of her friends. And she drinks, I think it's the first time she drinks, gets drunk, and her best friend walks her down to the basement where he rapes her. And he's her best friend and has been for years. So after all of these years where she's tried to rationalize it and understand it, and she hasn't been in touch with him, she's having these nightmares. And her partner tells her that, yeah, you've had these nightmares over and over and over again for years. But when Trump gets elected, they get worse, they get more intense. And she decides that she's going to confront him. She decides she's going to contact him and interview him about how this rape affected him, how his life has changed, how he feels about it. Did the perspective of who he thought he was change from this? This book is so raw and brave and extraordinary. I think it's the kind of voice that we need in this Me Too conversation that's gotten so sort of black and white about things, because she wants to understand. She wants to really know this, and she wants to kind of interrogate herself too, and her perspective and the way that she responded to it, not just in the moment, but years later. And it comes out in October. Kirkus just gave it this extraordinary starred review, but they said that it's like exactly the book that we need in this cultural moment, and I think that's true. Next is Divide Me by Zero by Lara Vatniar. This is a love story. This is a mother-daughter story. It's also a highly autobiographical novel that I realized when I'm reading the author's author questionnaire that this is actually her story. And then when questioned, she said, yeah, 98% of it's true. So it's the story, you may know Lara Vatniar from The New Yorker. Her first story ever published in English showed up in The New Yorker. That's pretty extraordinary to me. So she emigrated to Russia, and she had just recently gotten married, and she's there with her mom, and she's trying to understand this world of America. She learns English from watching really bad TV and movies like Pretty Woman, and she just starts writing English kind of obsessively, and she's brilliant at it. But at the same time, her marriage is falling apart, and she's trying to understand that. And her mom is a math professor and writes math textbooks, and so that's the way her way into the world is through math. And so she's always doing these calculations of whether she should stay in this marriage, and she does these intellectual exercises to deal with emotional things. She's an intensely emotional, passionate person, but she's always looking to math to kind of solve it for her. Yeah, I've been kind of obsessed with this book. This character, Katya, is so alive in it that I found myself quoting her over and over and over again, thinking like, who told me that? Which one of my friends told me that smart thing? And then realizing, no, this is a character in a book. She jumps off the page in that way. So she's interrogating her marriage. She's interrogating this obsessive love she has with another man in Russia who also emigrates to the US, and her relationship with her mom who is dying. And all of these things are kind of happening all at once. And this novel is investigating them, and it's beautiful. And then last, and just really briefly, Claire Fuller's Bitter Orange is coming out in paperback. This is a huge success for us. We love Claire Fuller. This is this paperback is going to be so gorgeous. We've never done this before, but it's going to have this great step back, and the quotes have been so amazing for it. The package is beautiful. We love this cover design, so we're keeping it. But this, just briefly, is the story about a woman whose mother dies, and she goes off. She's been sort of imprisoned by her mother because she's had to take care of her into her illness and old age for years and never really had her life. And then now she dies, and she can explore kind of all of her passions. And she moves to do this architectural investigation of this bridge on this crumbling estate outside of northern England. And there's this couple there, and they're sort of young and beautiful and vivacious and free in a way that is completely foreign to her. And they're all living in a house together. And then this character realizes that through her bathroom, there's a peephole that she can see into their apartment, and everything gets creepier from there. That's what I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have John.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Well, I'm John Seeley, and like you said at the beginning, I'm an author and newly minted publisher of Haywire Books. So before getting started, thank you all for hosting me and including me in this, and thank you for tuning in. I guess I will just dive right into Haywire Books. So I had a first novel that came out 5 years ago from Hub City Press, went on a tour, got to know a lot of the Southern indie booksellers, had some modest success, and then fell into the mid-list writer blues, which I noticed a lot of writers fall into. Meanwhile, our world kind of has fallen apart. I mean, not just politically, but our climate's in trouble. Our businesses are kind of frenetic. Our technology's out of hand, and everything just kind of went haywire. And I said, the world's nuts. I'm going to start a press. And so this is kind of my little attempt to make sense of the world. So the tagline I'm working with is making sense of a chaotic world. And kind of another little beacon I think that we've been looking at is Chekhov's got a quote where he says, he's writing a letter to a fellow artist and says, you're confusing solving a problem with stating a problem correctly, and it is only the latter of which is the job of the artist. So I've always kind of felt like that's a way of thinking about what good fiction does, is it asks a bunch of questions without necessarily imposing a sure-footed worldview on the reader. And that's about as specific as I can get as far as what we're publishing. I mean, it's novels by authors generally have some connection to the South, because that's, I know the Southern indie booksellers, and that's my base. So hello, everyone. And so I got 3.5 titles I want to talk about today. 3 titles that are, in the system, and then a 4th title that I just want to give a brief mention to. So I tried to do a little PowerPoint thing while we were getting set up here, but I'm not that capable. So I'm just going to hold this up as the first title is The Edge of America. It's my second novel. It's set in Miami, 1984, and is about a money laundering operation that goes wrong. There's a businessman who's got some CIA ties, and he is involved in this Iran-Contra style operation. He's trying to funnel drug money for the CIA and use the profits to foment a Cuban Revolution, and it doesn't work. So everything kind of falls apart. And I said it in 1984, kind of intentionally, with the Orwellian paranoia and the sort of go-go financial froth that was happening in the 80s. That Dickinson line about tell the truth but tell it slant. And I think all historical fiction is, it's about what's happening now. And I think I started this in 2008 and finished it in 2016. So it seems like a nice little bookend for, our world falling apart. So this publishes in September. This is a print copy. I just got print copies this week. It's in Edelweiss, if that's where you do your ordering. It's distributed through a distributor called Itasca, and they can sell books directly, or you can order it through Ingram. And you can also find me at haywirebooks.com. And if you have any issues, we'll do what we can to get your books to you however you like them. I guess, comp titles, it's very Graham Greenish, kind of Elmore Leonard, early Emily St. John Mandel. So that kind of, give you a little bit of a sense of where it fits on the shelf. So that's your audience for this. Second book is a 20th century or a 20th anniversary reissue of Patricia Henley's Hummingbird House. It's coming out in November. Hummingbird House, so it came out in 1999. It got a lot of attention at the time. It was a finalist for the National Book Award. It was on a small press called McMurray and Beck, which sold to McAdam Cage, which went bankrupt. So the book's been out of print for about 10 years. And Patricia is a former professor at Purdue University. She's really well known in the MFA creative writing world. And I had emailed her just to kind of say, hey, this is what I'm up to. And Hummingbird House is the kind of book I'm looking to publish. I don't know if you have a book or if you know anybody with a book. I'm kind of looking for, the next title. And she said, well, I don't have a new book, but this thing's out of print if you have any interest. So I said, yes, we're glad to get this back into print. We've got a foreword from Steve Yarbrough, whose first novel was also with McMurray and Beck at the same time. And got a Q&A and with the author and a reader's guide in the back. So it's going to be kind of a nice addition. And the story is about a midwife in Central America in the 1980s. And she's sort of looks up one day and realizes she's been working in this war-torn country for many years, and it's just time to go home. And it's sort of her story of her journey north and her story of spiritual regeneration. There's a little bit of a romance in this novel, but I think what really prompted me to email Patricia and say, this is the kind of book I'm looking for. It's about women in war, which is not a topic that gets a whole lot of play in fiction. And it's just exquisitely written. And it's also just, stunningly relevant now. I think, 20 years later, U.S. foreign policy has not gotten any better. The Central American situation's not gotten any better. So I think it'll speak to readers today. So that's coming out November 5th, and it's also kind of in the system for pre-ordering if you're interested. And then the third book, Mark Powell's Firebird. Powell is a Southern author. He's he's from the Appalachian region. Ron Rash called him the best Appalachian novelist of his generation, but he, for the last couple of books, has not really set them anywhere near Appalachia. He had a book called The Sheltering that came out in 2014 that you might remember. It was about a drone pilot in Florida. It came out with Story River, Pat Conroy's imprint. And then his next novel was Small Treasons that came out a couple of years ago from Simon & Schuster. It was about a young guy who gets radicalized by ISIS terrorist videos. And then this book kind of follows in that same vein. It's set in the 2014 Russia-Ukraine conflict and is about covert U.S. involvement in that conflict. There's an American hedge fund billionaire who is trying to foment a small-scale war in Ukraine to prevent oil companies from tapping into some gas reserves so that this guy can profit from the sale of a gas pipeline opening up in Slovakia. And then some kind of low-scale operatives get wind of this operation and try to stop it, and things kind of fall apart. Powell's kind of writes what he knows. He spent some time over there. He had a Fulbright and spent a semester in Slovakia. He's about to go back to Romania on a Fulbright. So he's just a brilliant researcher. And this book is nuts. It's crazy. It's great. It's exciting, and it's coming out in January. So you'll be hearing more about it soon. We'll be at SIBA in September. I think Mark's coming down. So we'll have some ARCs, and you can meet the author, and I think this will be a good one. And then the final book, I don't have ARCs or a cover yet, but next summer we're going to be putting out Heather Bell Adams' second novel, The Good Luck Stone. Her first novel was Maranatha Road. It came out on West Virginia Press a few years ago. She's a North Carolina writer, and her new one is about a Savannah society matron who's got this a 70-year-old secret from when she was a nurse in Manila during World War II, and that secret is about to come out. So it's an exciting read, and we're working on covers now, but maybe at SIBA we'll have more to talk about with that. So with that, that's it from over here. Thank you again, and hope everybody has a great day.
Well, thank you, John. We just Kelly Justice is here, and she'd like to say just a few comments about your press.
Oh, Lord.
Hey.
Hi, Kelly.
How you doing, John? I had a conflict. I couldn't make it until just now, but it's important to me that, I don't know, Linda, did you mention any of my comments to you?
I mentioned it in briefly, but it'd be wonderful if you just went over them a little bit.
Okay. And of course, I'm in a conference room, and I don't have a copy of my paper newsletter that it just dropped, and it features John's book on the cover, because we are deeply devoted to seeing this book work and this press work. Every day, I'm sure every single one of you is approached by small press people or people that are starting their own houses, or people that just have one title that happens to be their own, and John, close your ears, okay, for a second, and then you just have this eye roll. You've seen it all before. This is, every press starts somewhere, and John is not just a wonderful author, he's an amazing publisher. So every publisher started with one book. And just, if you can get over your jadedness, if you're like me and have been doing this way too long, but not long enough, I guess. John is doing this the right way. And I look forward to seeing more of his books and what he's bringing to the table as a Southern publisher and as an independent publisher. And has anybody brought up the remarks that Michael Reynolds made a while back?
About small presses?
About small presses, okay. Well, I will just do that because Michael Reynolds, if you don't know who he is Europa, is the American, is the face of America, Europa, and he called indie bookstores to task, and me specifically, in a room about a year ago, and really, and you all are here because you're interested in small press, which is fantastic. But he pointed out that, he said, as much as we talk about that we don't get a big enough voice in the book selling world, and that we have limited budgets and limited means compared to our competitors, our big competitors, he said, maybe we should, and then our customers have a hard time finding us because we don't have those budgets and we don't have that. He said, maybe we should think about representing our independent presses more deeply and more often. So we've made a commitment at Fountain to we shelve our independent press galleys in a totally different place from our galleys that come from all the other big five, and keep them longer, give them a longer chance. That's just one thing that improved things immediately. At staff meeting, after the staff meeting, we talk about staff picks, and we always mention what publisher published the book, so we're educating the staff in that way, so we understand what small press is. So sometimes just the buyer knows what that means, and nobody else on staff knows what that means, So anyway, that's Michael's really lit a fire under me, and then John came along with this amazing project and this amazing book, and so that's why I hauled whatever here to get here from my other meeting to just put in my 2 cents. So I guess that's enough. Okay.
Thank you, Kelly. And SIVA is also very committed to small presses, and that's why we're devoting so much time to small independent presses in our Publisher Picks programming. So thank you all presenters for being here. It was wonderful to hear about all those titles. We have an Edelweiss collection. If you're a bookseller and you didn't receive the Edelweiss collection, we'll have it in our newsletter next week, and I can also send it to you, and that way you can order the titles into your store. So thank you everyone for showing up, and I will stop recording. And we have office hours until 5 o'clock. If you want to hang on, we'll still be here. So, but otherwise it's officially ended. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, thank you for the kind words too. Kind of bowled over here.